Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Okay, welcome back to this episode. This episode is going to come back to the theme of workers' compensation, but specifically, we're going to talk with attorney Jeff Roberts about workers' compensation claims for first responders, policemen, firemen, EMTs, ambulance drivers, and any other first responder out there. Jeff, welcome back to the studio, guy.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
Buddy, I'm glad to be here. I love coming to Murray. I love sitting down and talking with you about this. I learned something in every one of these episodes, so this is kind of fun for me. A lot of people think that, well, a police officer has, by definition, a risky job. And, there are other risky jobs. There are factory workers who are around big presses and things like that. I mean, all of these workplace environments are dangerous. It just so happens a police officer or firefighter may be in a little bit more risk on a day-to-day basis. But nevertheless, under Kentucky law, they still qualify for workers' comp. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. They qualify. Any employee, well, say that most employees in Kentucky will qualify for workers' comp. There's a few exempt occupations, agriculture being the primary one, but though it's very, very few that are exempt from workers' compensation coverage in Kentucky. And first responders, police officers, firefighters, ambulance personnel, etc., are all covered under workers' compensation.
And there's a myriad of things that can go wrong, obviously. I mean, we've seen the headlines, we've watched the news stories. I mean, police officers in particular are on the front lines every day. And so a lot of times in workers' comp, we think, well, this is somebody who twisted a knee or strained a back, maybe lifting something at the office. But when you have a physical job such as a police officer, especially in one of the larger metros, it's a big deal. And there's always something that could happen. You could turn your ankle chasing after somebody, right? I mean, this is still workers' comp.
Yes, it's still workers' comp. And obviously in a metro situation, you have somewhat different than you do in a rural situation, but the job is just as dangerous.
Just as dangerous. Maybe more so sometimes.
Yeah, you don't have as much backup from that standpoint. So, but the police officers, they are coming into contact with violent individuals frequently and can get injured in a struggle. From that standpoint, obviously, you hope none of them ever get shot, but they do. And so, the injuries that you look at with first responders can be similar to what you see in other industries as well, but you can also look at different one. You're more likely to see some injuries with a first responder than you are a police officer than you are with a factory worker. Do people go into the factory and sometimes they start shooting? Yes, they do. That's a rare event, thankfully, but police officers get shot at much more frequently.
And again, that is not necessarily, well, obviously criminal law is involved in that, but again, from a compensation standpoint, there's also workers' compensation, and that comes in. That runs the gamut, that runs the same process as someone who was hurt at work, right? I mean, because technically the officer's at work,
yes.
So they're going to have they're going to have temporary total disability (TTD) payments and all of that. Do you want to kind of just give a general overview of that process?
Yeah,
we've done a lot of episodes on workers' comp, which is great because that's a big part of your practice.
Right. If you're injured on the job, regardless of what occupation you're in, the benefits are the same regardless of your first responder, your factory worker, or you're an attorney. And that is, the medical benefits are there. The insurance carrier is responsible for 100% of the medical bills that is reasonable and necessary for the work-related injury. And that would continue now in Kentucky, continues for a minimum of 15 years from the date of the work injury, potentially lifetime depending on the type of injury that is received. The second benefit is what you referenced, and that's temporary total disability benefits. That's what you receive when you're off work under doctor's orders because of the injury. And that's paid out as a general rule at 66 2/3% of the average weekly wage. There is a max amount every year. It changes every year, but there's a max amount you can receive in temporary total. So, high wage earners sometimes hit that cap, and the cap is less than 66 2/3, but most employees are going to receive 66 2/3% of their average weekly wage when they, as that term is defined under the Workers' Compensation Act.
I tell you, one thing I found interesting, I learned this a while back, is that when you're looking at average weekly wage, that's a really complicated calculation. But that also includes overtime. That would include all sorts of other, maybe you're doing some off-duty work. All of that kind of comes into the average weekly wage, or it can, correct?
It can, yes. The overtime hours always come into play, but not at overtime pay, which I've never understood, but that's the way the statute is written and is interpreted. Bonuses come into play there, shift differentials for some workers, and as you mentioned, like if a police officer is injured on the job, but they, in addition to doing their police duty work, they work security at some facility in their downtime, and their employer is aware of it and approves of it, then you add that other income that they got from their side job is added into the average weekly wage mix. So if they made another $75 a week doing that side job, that $75 a week is added to what they received as a police officer in calculating what their average weekly wage is for workers' comp benefits, so that they're getting 66 2/3% of their total income, not just the police officer income.
And I was really surprised to hear that, because I would have thought it would have related to specifically the job of being on duty at the time, but no, it's not necessarily.
Right.
It's sources of income.
Exactly, and that's for every employee, not just first responders. But yes, a lot of people think, the side job doesn't come into play here. I wasn't injured on the side job. But it does come into play, because that is what your average weekly wage really was. Now, one caveat is the employer has to know.
Right.
So if you're doing it on the sly and your employer doesn't know because you're not supposed to have that side job, then you may not be able to recover for the loss of wages from the side job.
Right. But if I were down here at Kroger or Walmart and I were working, I got hurt in the job, but I also do a second job somewhere, and Kroger and Walmart, my supervisors understand that. Again, it's the exact same situation.
Correct. Yes.
That's fantastic. I mean, I hate to say fantastic. You're filing workers' comp because you got hurt,
right.
But knowing that some extra revenue or extra income is available through these benefits, I mean, that's good news. And this, when you get into situations where you're now dealing with a firefighter who obviously can be at risk. You want to come back to a topic?
No, well, I was going through all the benefits.
And,
you're trying to move on before I finish. The third benefit is vocational rehabilitation, and that is if because of the injury you cannot go back to doing the work you were doing or other work that you have training, then we can get you retrained into another field. The final benefit is permanent disability benefits, which can be permanent partial disability, which means you have you have disability, but you're still able to work and even go back to the same job potentially. Or it could be permanent total disability. Hopefully not, but unfortunately some people are totally disabled from a work injury.
Right. And so again, this also applies to a firefighter who may be injured in an explosion, or maybe they're inside and something happens. Maybe they get some smoke inhalation. It could be a number of different things that could happen. Again, it's a work-related injury, so Kentucky Workers' Comp system is in play.
Yes, exactly. It comes into play for those individuals as well if they're fighting a fire, and frankly, something that can easily occur, unfortunately, is here recently we've had 90-plus degree days, and the heat index has it well above 100. And, if something catches fire, they still got to go fight that fire. They can't say, well, it's too hot today.
Right.
They still got to go out there, and a heat stroke is something that can certainly come into play with firefighters. Or, obviously burns. I've represented some firefighters who have been burned in the past carrying out their job duties. So, all of those, any type of injury like that is covered under, as long as it occurs while they're on the job, then it's going to be covered under workers' comp.
That makes sense. And when you start talking about, like EMTs who might be going into a house trying to lift a patient onto a gurney and get them out to the ambulance. I'm amazed at how many healthcare workers, even in hospitals, orderlies and nurses, get lower back strains and things like that, trying to just move a patient or deal with a patient who's in the process of falling. And they grab the patient. There are a lot of these pulls and strains that happen all throughout the healthcare system.
Correct. Yes, and I've represented ambulance drivers who have suffered injuries, carrying the gurneys or the stretchers with individuals on them, appeals from car wrecks and things of that nature, and have some significant injuries in that doing that. And what's always amazed me is 90% of the time, if not greater than 90% of the time, even though they've hurt their back carrying the person up, they still complete that job and get that patient in the ambulance and get them to the hospital. Yeah,
just like being a nurse, that's kind of a calling. I've got a lot of nurses in my family, and that's a calling. I mean, they put up with so much. They're amazing people.
Yes.
So we've talked about, for instance, a fight that a police officer may get involved with, or a gunshot wound. We've talked about a firefighter who's been injured through a burn or heat exhaustion. We've talked about muscles and strains for EMTs and other types of first responder accidents. But there's another situation that comes to play where I may be if I'm a first responder, I may be en route to an emergency situation. And let's say I'm in a collision at that point. Let's say I've got my lights going and I'm zipping down Main Street here and somebody at the cross street, T-bones me. Again, I still have not only a workers' comp, but let's talk about a different kind of claim that is also available.
Yes, in that setting, if there, a police officer is involved or any emergency responders involved in an automobile collision, they would have the claim against. Now, they would have a claim against the at-fault driver, as long as that at-fault driver is not a coworker. So, if the driver, if it's a non-emergency situation, and the driver we'll use an ambulance, for instance, accidentally runs a red light and causes a collision, and the EMT in there with them is injured, they don't have a claim against the coworker. Their exclusive remedy against their employer or a coworker is workers' compensation. But if the other driver runs the red light and hits the ambulance, then they've got the claim, the workers' compensation claim, because they were on the job at the time. And they also have a claim against the at-fault driver that caused the collision in that setting, and would be able to recover damages from them. Now, Kentucky law provides that you cannot have a double recovery. So for the damages that workers' comp covers, workers' comp is entitled to be reimbursed that instead of you getting lost wages from your, the temporary total disability benefits for being off work under doctor's orders from workers' comp, and get the same lost wages from the at-fault driver's insurance company. You can't do that.
There's no double dipping.
No double dipping, exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow that from that perspective. But there are a lot of damages that you can recover in addition. For one thing, workers' comp is 2/3. The temporary total is 2/3 of your average weekly wage. That extra 1/3 you can recover from the at-fault driver's insurance. Workers' comp, you do not get pain and suffering in workers' comp. You do get pain and suffering in your claim against the at-fault driver. So you've got both of those claims. And again, it doesn't have to be a first responder. If you drive as part of your work and you're injured in a car wreck, you have both of those claims as well.
So you could be a delivery person. You could be driving down the road and get into an accident. And again, if the other person's the at-fault driver, you have that what's called a third-party claim, and you also have your workers' comp because you were on the clock at the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And you see that frequently, or if somebody in my office were to drive something up to the courthouse and they were to be filed and they got injured in a car wreck going up there, they were on the job taking that thing up, that pleading or whatever, to the courthouse, so they'd have workers' comp and then a claim against the at-fault driver.
Jeff, I'm not an attorney, but I would say if I'm you, I'm just going to have them walk up the hill. it's a block and a half, man.
I understand, but then if they get hit as a pedestrian, they're going to have even worse injuries.
Exactly.
So.
No, it makes a lot of sense. But so again, in a third party situation where I've got both the comp claim and the general personal injury claim, just an automobile accident claim, those can be filed simultaneously, right?
Correct, and would be pursued at the same time.
Right, right. So you don't have to wait till one situation gets resolved.
No, you can pursue those, and frankly, you can, depending on the situation. In some situations, a car wreck claim may resolve before the workers' compensation claim does. Others, the workers' comp claim will resolve before the car wreck case. Each case is going to depend on its own set of facts in that regard. There's no requirement under the law that you resolve this one before you resolve that one.
And to throw a curveball in there, there's also a chance that Social Security claims, maybe Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, could also come into play.
If the injury is severe enough, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
What I find interesting, obviously, is that you have the ability to handle all three of those claims, and a lot of law firms actually don't. They may handle the personal injury, the motor vehicle side of it, but they won't necessarily handle the comp or the Social Security side. Whereas at your firm, you handle all three.
I do. I handle all three of those, and that it results in a cost savings to the client, because clients, as most law firms like myself, will advance the cost, but the costs are contingent upon recovery. So if we're successful, we'll get reimbursed our cost. So if you have multiple attorneys, one attorney handling the Social Security, one handling the workers' comp, one handling the PI case, well, then you got three attorneys ordering medical records, paying for medical records, and then when the claim's resolved, you're paying for the same set of medical records three times. Whereas if I'm handling all of it, I pay for it one time, usually in all three cases.
Right.
And the other thing, there are other firms that do that as well, that handle all three types of cases. From that, I am, at least the way I do it, is I'm the attorney in the firm. So I'm handling your workers' compensation claim. I'm handling your car wreck claim. I'm handling your Social Security disability claim. I know what's going on in all three of those at one time. And in some firms that have multiple attorneys, you may have one handling the workers' comp, a different one handling the car wreck case, and hopefully they are communicating among themselves. But with me, when we talk, I'll answer any questions you got on any of the three cases instead of having to be shipped to
Right.
three different attorneys.
Well, the risk is the left hand may not know what the right hand is doing in some situations, because it could be multiple attorneys within the same firm, or it could be multiple firms because this firm just doesn't do one aspect of the case.
Right.
Whereas here, you're handling all three, and you are the attorney handling the case, not, well, I've got a case manager over here handling this part of it, and I've got a paralegal. I mean, you have paralegals obviously, but they're not they're not answering to other people. They're ultimately answering to you, and you're responsible to the client.
That's true, and I do have paralegals that work with me. And when I have a case where we have a car wreck component and a workers' comp component, and potentially a Social Security component, or we have workers' comp, Social Security, or whatever, the same paralegal is going to be working on all of those cases. So you're only going to have that one paralegal on the case as well. For that very same reason, I don't want a situation where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, because that can ultimately come back to hurt the client. Because if you resolve the workers' compensation claim in a certain way, it can reduce what the person receives in the Social Security disability benefits. If you resolve it in a certain way, it can enhance what you receive, what the client gets to keep out of the personal injury settlement. Because if you take an assignment of their subrogation claim, which unless you do law, you don't really need to know what that is. But if you get the workers' comp carrier to give the injured party the workers' comp carrier's claim for what they've paid out, then the injured party gets to keep a lot more of the personal injury settlement from there. And Social Security doesn't care anything about that, so it doesn't reduce what the person's going to pay in Social Security from that perspective. So you can, by having the same attorney handling all of the claims and know what's going on in all of the claims, ultimately can result and should result in the client putting more money in their pocket and getting to keep it instead of having to pay it out to somebody else.
Right. Well, as I had said in the previous episode, this stuff is complicated. I know it may seem simple on the outset, but there's so much behind the scenes that really an experienced attorney knows and understands, and having one person who knows all three areas of this issue, again, workers' comp, potentially a civil case involving a personal injury case, and then if Social Security disability is involved as well, having one person who knows all that can really make it easy for you to get answers from the attorney handling the case. And that's one of the reasons I love coming down here and speaking with you, is because you do that for your clients on a day in, day out basis.
Yes, yeah, I do from that standpoint. So, and, and I enjoy practice in all three areas, which is the reason I practice in all three areas from that standpoint. But that's, rarely do I have a client that has more than one type of claim that when I talk to that client, that we don't talk about both claims.
Sure.
It's rare that it's just one claim that they have a question about, or there's just, if it's me that, if I'm talking to the client because I need to talk to the client about something, it's still rare that I just need information that's going to benefit only one claim.
Right.
I'm not going to say it never occurs, but it's a rare occurrence.
Jeff, we've got a few minutes left in this episode, and I want to come back to something that especially I think applies to first responders. I dare say police officers, moreover, but that's just an assumption on my part. Dealing with PTSD and how that relates to Kentucky workers' comp, it gets really, really technical here, doesn't it?
Kentucky workers' comp law and how it treats psychological injuries, especially in regard to first responders, is awful in my opinion. And I and others that do what I do have fought to try to get it to change. The way Kentucky law is written is a psychological injury is not compensable unless it's associated with a physical trauma. And I'm assuming that that law was written that way because it did not used to be that way. I'm assuming it was written that way because of somebody being able to potentially pursue a personal injury claim a workers' compensation claim because my supervisor talked mean to me or something of that nature. I never saw that occur in my now 29 years or almost 29 years of practicing workers' compensation law. Never talked to an attorney who ever pursued that type of claim. But they put that into the law back in '96 that a psychological injury has to be associated with a physically traumatic event physical injury to some extent. And what that has done in regard to first responders is first responders, we ask these individuals as part of their job duties to go and see severely injured individuals and to help those individuals.
It's the nature of their work.
It's the nature of their work. They go to car wrecks where, unfortunately, people have been badly mangled and are deceased. Firefighters go into homes and, unfortunately, find dead bodies in those homes. Police, EMS go out to these car wrecks. From there, they go into places where shootings have occurred and there's dead bodies present, and we have them and we expect them to go in and see all of this that can cause PTSD. And then we turn around and say, but even though we ask you to go do this as part of your job duties, and we know that's very traumatic to any individual and that it's going to cause anybody who does it long enough, even short enough for that matter, psychological problems.
It has to. We're human.
Exactly. And some people may be able to deal with it a little better, and they may have the resources around them to help them deal with it without seeking mental health treatment. Others may need mental health treatment, and it's fine either way from that standpoint. If you need the treatment, go get the treatment. There is no shame in that whatsoever, and there should not ever be any shame in that. But then we turn around and say, but it's going to be on your own dollar. We're not going to have workers' comp cover that. and that is just wrong in my opinion.
I agree.
And that needs to change. Now, if the police officer's in a scuffle and somebody gets physically injured and that causes, or they're in a scuffle and they end up, a gun goes off and the person that they're scuffling with gets severely injured or dies, and that causes the PTSD, then that's covered in that setting. But frankly, when I'm representing the police officer, the firefighter, whoever, I shouldn't have to try to finagle the language from the expert witnesses and everything to show that it's there's a physically traumatic. My client had some kind of physical response or physical injury as well
Right.
to that. For that to be covered.
It seems like it's a higher bar to clear.
It is a higher bar.
When it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, there is a case directly on point that says seeing the scenes and having to deal with those scenes is not covered under Kentucky's Workers' Compensation Act. It has to be associated with the physical trauma to the person who's claiming it. It's not physical trauma to somebody else. It's physical trauma to the worker who's claiming it. And that's just, that should not be a bar or should not be a hurdle that first responders ought to have to jump over for their PTSD claims to be covered. A factory worker, fine, okay, and unfortunately I have represented factory workers that have been involved in injuries where they've dealt with dead bodies as well, that because the injury, the event caused them injury and caused somebody else to be killed in the incident. And they had PTSD from that, and it was covered.
Well, was that because the person who was dealing with the deceased person actually sustained an injury as well? I mean, is that
yes,
the technicality?
Yeah. Well, this person did sustain an injury.
Yeah.
The one that jumps in my mind right
Yeah.
off did sustain a physical injury themselves, and then had their coworker who died, who they
Right,
attempted
right.
to assist. As well, but since they did have a physical injury in the same event, their PTSD was covered from that. An EMT who came to that scene and assisted my client with his injury, and then had to deal with the person and maybe even trying to save the person who died, and then has PTSD overseeing the exact same event. Theirs is not covered because they didn't have a physical
Right.
trauma to their own body, and that just. With first responders, that's not the way it ought to be, in my opinion, in Kentucky. And I've talked to us blue in the face to several legislatures in the past, and some will agree with me when I'm saying it, and some do agree. But don't get me wrong, there's some who have tried to get that change made, and I've had others that tell me they agree with me, but then turn around and vote against it when it came up.
That seems like that ought to be one of those easy things that we could do for our first responders here in Kentucky. And granted, I'm not lobbying here or anything like that, but that just seems like one of those things that just sounds wrong.
Exactly. And when there are certain things that when you look at it and it just doesn't pass the smell test, you ought to do something about it.
Yeah.
And the first responders not, frankly, you can tell I'm somewhat passionate about this because I have a lot of friends who are first responders with what I do for a living. And then, as a lot of listeners know, in addition to my private practice, I've been a assistant county attorney prosecuting for numerous years as well. So I have a lot of friends that are first responders. I've represented a lot of first responders in my private practice in workers' comp and car accident cases. And I am impressed with what they do. I'm eternally grateful for what they do, and they deserve to be treated in any type of injury they receive that's associated with their work, regardless of whether it's a mental health injury because of what they have to see day in and day out, or if it's a physical injury. Both ought to be covered the same under the workers' comp laws, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you. Jeff, if I'm a first responder and I've been injured on the job and I'm interested in filing a workers' comp claim, or if I have other issues that I need to talk to you about, maybe I've just been in a car wreck, how do I get a hold of you?
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me is to call my office. The phone number here at my office is 270-753-0053, and my wife will tell you I'm here at the office more than I'm at home. So if you call the office, you're probably going to reach me unless I'm out in court. So if you call during business hours, I'm going to be here unless I'm out in court. And if you don't want to call, or if you're a first responder who works midnights, and no offense, I'm not here at midnight.
Most nights.
Most times. I have been, but not usually. And I don't answer the phone when I am, because I got something that's due the next day that I got to get out. Or I got a trial that I'm preparing for. So if you want to email me, you can email me. It's JFF at jeffrobertslaw.com. You got to put the law on there, or it'll go to somebody else besides me.
Right.
That both of those are probably the best ways to reach me. If you're looking at my website, you'll have a little chat box. Do you want to talk to somebody? Pop up on there, and if you click on that, there's people who monitor my website for me that will. And when you're talking to those, you're not talking to me. You're not talking to somebody in my office. It's somebody who monitors it. And they will get some basic general information from you about what you're contacting the office about. And then they will send me an email, usually that will, if you give it to them, that have your email and your phone number on there, and then we will reach back out to you at our earliest convenience after we get that email.
Right. Jeff, I really appreciate that you talking to us about this topic. I mean, anytime we can talk about first responders, I think they deserve our respect. They deserve the honor that they've really earned by just stepping forth to take care of all of us, be that a police officer, a sheriff's deputy, firefighter, EMT, any other first responders. They're on the front line, and I wish our system did a little bit better for them.
I agree with you 110%. Some people may get mad at me for this, but they deserve to get paid a whole lot more than somebody catching a football.
I agree. All right, my friend. Thank you very much for your time today, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.